All right, mate. Welcome back to Mate Let's Talk. We're going to jump right into a deep dive today on a topic that's been heating up the inbox lately.
Yeah, feeling the heat a bit.
Definitely. And, it's one that hits close to home for a lot of Aussies out there.
Literally close to home.
Exactly. We're talking about stamp duty, and let's be real, it's a bit of a beast.
It can be a bit of a monster for sure.
We had a listener write in saying, and I'm just going to quote this directly, stamp duty is just theft. I get nothing in return for that money.
Oof. Yeah, that sentiment's pretty common.
It really is. So to kick things off, for anyone who hasn't gone through the whole property buying saga here in Australia,
Yeah.
what exactly are we talking about when we say stamp duty?
Well, in a nutshell, it's a tax you pay as the buyer when you purchase a property.
Sounds simple enough.
It is in theory, but here's where it gets tricky. The amount you pay isn't a fixed number. It varies depending on a couple of things.
Okay, like what?
First off, which state or territory you're buying in. Each one has its own rules and rates.
Makes sense. Australia's a
Okay.
big place.
Right. And of course, the price of the property plays a huge role. The more expensive your dream home, the more stamp duty you'll be shelling out.
So it's not like a flat fee,
Mm.
more expensive house, bigger tax bill.
Exactly. And that's where that feeling of theft our listener mentioned comes in. You're paying potentially tens of thousands of dollars, and you don't see a direct return.
It's not like you're getting a new road or a hospital wing built with your name on it.
Not quite. So the question is, where does all that money actually go? If it's not funding visible improvements, who benefits?
Yeah, it feels like it just vanishes.
Oh, it might seem that way, but stamp duty is a major cash cow for state governments. It makes up a surprisingly large chunk of their revenue.
Seriously.
Yeah, the Nationals WA pointed out that in Western Australia, stamp duty actually brings in more money than the royalties from mining gold, lithium, and nickel combined.
Hang on, you're telling me those tiny little squares we lick and stick on envelopes generate more revenue than digging up actual gold?
I know, right? It sounds crazy, but it's true. And this isn't just a WA thing either. Stamp duty is a big deal for governments across the country.
So it's clearly a significant source of income for them. But if it's such a reliable revenue stream, why are we hearing calls for reform? Why are economists and even some politicians saying it needs to change?
That's where the plot thickens. While it might be a consistent moneymaker, economists argue that stamp duty is actually a pretty inefficient tax.
Inefficient, how so?
Well, it can actually hinder economic growth by discouraging people from moving homes, even when it makes sense for them.
Wait, how does that work? How does staying put hurt the economy?
Imagine you get offered an amazing job opportunity in a different city, but the thought of paying a massive chunk of your savings just to move makes you hesitate.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a major deterrent.
Or maybe you need to upsize for a growing family, but the stamp duty makes it financially out of reach.
Right, so it's not just about the individual buyer feeling the pinch. It's about the potential impact on jobs, families, and the overall economy.
Precisely. These are real situations that people face every day, and it can have a ripple effect across the entire country.
So we're not just talking about a line item on a tax bill. It's about the bigger picture and how this tax might be holding people back.
Exactly. It's about choices, opportunities, and the potential flow-on effects for all of Australia.
So we've got this tax that some people see as theft. It's a big revenue generator for governments, but it also might be dragging down the economy.
Sounds like we've got a real head-scratcher on our hands.
It definitely does. And to make things even more interesting, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Each state is grappling with this issue in its own way.
Yeah, Australia's a diverse place, and each state has its own unique challenges and priorities.
Right, so let's take a virtual road trip around the country and see what's happening on the stamp duty front. Shall we start down south in South Australia?
Let's do it. They've actually made some pretty significant moves for first home buyers down there.
Really? What have they done?
Well, they've completely abolished stamp duty for first-time buyers of brand new builds.
Wait a minute, completely. So no matter how much the property costs?
Yep, no price cap. And to sweeten the deal even further, they're throwing in a $15,000 first homeowner grant on top.
Wow. That's a pretty sweet deal. Makes you wonder if they're going to see a construction boom down there.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, over in Western Australia, things are a little different.
How so?
The Nationals WA are actually proposing something even more radical. They want to get rid of stamp duty for first home buyers altogether.
Oh, hold on. You mean no stamp duty at all? For any property?
Exactly. Whether
Yeah.
it's a new build or an existing property, they want to ditch it completely.
That's a pretty bold move. Imagine the impact that could have on affordability in WA.
It would be huge. We're talking about potentially saving buyers thousands of dollars
Yeah.
and opening up the market to a whole new generation.
So we've got South Australia focusing on new builds and WA potentially axing stamp duty entirely for first-timers. What about Queensland? What's their approach?
Queensland's also jumped on the no stamp duty for new builds train for first home buyers, but they already had some pretty generous exemptions in place, especially for properties under $700,000.
So they're basically building on existing support for first-home buyers in the state. It seems like there's a definite trend emerging here, making it easier for people to get into the market, especially for new construction.
You got it. And now let's head down south to Victoria. They've taken a slightly different path.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's happening in Victoria?
They've expanded their off-the-plan stamp duty concession, and this one's a bit unique because it includes investors for a limited time.
Investors. You mean people who are buying to rent out, not to live in themselves?
Exactly. And there's no price cap on this concession. But of course there's a catch.
Huh, there always is. What is it?
There's some confusion about what exactly qualifies as a strata subdivision, which is a requirement to access the concession.
A strata subdivision. What in the world is that?
Imagine a big apartment building or a complex of townhouses. Each individual unit or townhouse within that larger development would be considered a strata subdivision.
Ah, okay. I get it. So it's
Yeah.
a good opportunity for investors, but maybe a bit of a legal minefield if you're not careful.
Yeah, definitely. It's worth getting expert advice if you're thinking of taking advantage of this concession in Victoria. You don't want to get caught out by the fine print.
Sound advice.
Mhm.
All right, so we've covered South Australia, WA, Queensland, and Victoria. What's the situation like in Tasmania?
Tasmania's got a pretty sweet deal for first home buyers who are looking at existing homes. No stamp duty if the property is under $750,000.
No stamp duty at all. That's amazing.
And they're also offering a 50% discount on new apartments up to that same price point, and that applies to everyone, not just first-time buyers.
So they're trying to make both existing homes and new apartments more attractive to buyers. Interesting strategy.
It's a good move considering Tasmania, like many parts of Australia, is facing a housing affordability crisis.
Makes sense. These measures are probably aimed at tackling that head-on. Okay, so 5 states down 2 to go. What's the latest in the ACT?
The ACT government just announced some major stamp duty cuts in their 2024-25 budget. They're now offering full exemptions for first home buyers, pensioners, and people with disabilities on properties up to $1 million.
Well, that's a pretty comprehensive approach.
Yeah,
Sounds like they're trying to make homeownership more accessible for a wider range of people.
it definitely seems that way.
All right, last but not least, we have the Northern Territory. What's the stamp duty situation like up north?
Well, unfortunately for buyers in the NT, it's not such good news. Stamp duty costs have actually tripled in the last 30 years.
Triple. Ouch. That's gotta hurt.
It's rough. To give you an idea, if you're buying a median-priced home in Darwin, you're looking at almost $24,000 just for stamp duty.
So it's a real mixed bag across the country. Some states are actively trying to reduce or eliminate stamp duty, while others are, well, not so.
That's right.
And it's important to remember that stamp duty reform is a complicated beast with a lot of moving parts. Different states have different priorities and circumstances, so there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of stamp duty, the arguments for and against it, and how each state is tackling the issue. But before we wrap things up for this part of our deep dive, let's circle back to our listener's comment about feeling like stamp duty is theft.
You're right, we can't forget about that. And this is where the research from the E61 Institute really hits home.
Okay, let's unpack that research. What did they find?
Their research shows that stamp duty's effects go way beyond that initial financial hit. It can actually impact some pretty big life decisions like changing jobs or starting a family.
Whoa, hold on. How does stamp duty affect things like that?
Well, think about it. If you know you're going to have to fork out a small fortune just to move to a slightly bigger house or a better location for work, you might think twice about making that move. Yeah, that makes sense. Especially with the cost of living these days. Who wants to add another massive expense on top of everything else?
Exactly. And then there's the impact on starting a family. Imagine you're a young couple planning to have kids.
Okay.
You know, you'll need more space, but upsizing to a family-friendly home could mean a hefty stamp duty bill.
Right.
So you might delay having kids or decide to stay in a smaller place, even though it's not ideal for a growing family.
It's crazy how something that seems like a simple tax can have such a big impact on people's lives.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. And it goes back to our listener's comment about feeling like stamp duty is theft. It's not just about the money itself, it's about the opportunities and choices that people might be missing out on.
It's sort of like an invisible hand holding people back.
Mm.
So we've got this tax that's potentially hurting the economy,
Mm-hmm.
impacting life choices, and leaving people feeling ripped off. What are the potential solutions? Is there a magic bullet to fix this?
I wish it were that easy. It's a complex issue, and there are a lot of different opinions about the best way forward. One idea that's been gaining traction is replacing stamp duty with an annual land tax.
Okay, I've heard of land tax, but can you explain what that means exactly?
Sure, land tax is basically a recurring tax that you pay every year. It's calculated based on the value of the land your property sits on, not the value of the building itself.
So instead of one huge upfront payment when you buy a property, you'd pay a smaller amount each year based on the land value. Interesting. What are the pros and cons of that?
Well, the main argument for land tax is that it would remove that massive financial hurdle of stamp duty, making it easier for people to move. They could upsize, downsize, or relocate without that big tax bill looming over them.
I could definitely see how that would be appealing.
Yeah.
It would remove that feeling of being trapped by stamp duty.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing there are some downsides too.
You're right, there are concerns. One of the biggest worries is that it could shift the tax burden in a way that negatively impacts certain groups like retirees or those on fixed incomes. They might struggle with an annual payment even if it's smaller than the upfront stamp duty cost.
That's a valid point.
Mm-hmm.
Any solution needs to be carefully considered to make sure it's fair and doesn't create hardship for others. So land tax is one option on the table. Are there any other ideas being explored?
Another approach that's been suggested is a hybrid model, which would involve a smaller upfront stamp duty payment combined with an ongoing land tax component.
Oh, so like a blend of the two systems.
Exactly. You'd still have that initial lump sum to generate revenue for the government, but it wouldn't be such a massive hit to the wallet. And then the land tax would provide a more steady income stream over time.
So a compromise, essentially. And I guess some would argue that this gradual transition would be less disruptive to the market and give people time to adjust.
That's the thinking behind it. It's fascinating to see how many different ideas are out there. Clearly, this is an issue that's getting people thinking, and it affects pretty much everyone in Australia.
It really does. And after diving into all these sources, it seems like our listeners' comment about stamp duty feeling like theft isn't just a knee-jerk reaction. There are some legitimate concerns about the impact of this tax both on individuals and on the economy as a whole.
Absolutely. And while stamp duty does contribute to funding important public services, it's worth exploring whether there are more efficient and equitable ways to achieve the same goal.
Right, because ultimately it's about finding a system that benefits everyone. So what can our listeners do to navigate this complex world of property and taxes?
The most important thing is to do your research. Understand the stamp duty rules in your specific state or territory.
Okay.
Find out about any exemptions, concessions, or upcoming changes that might apply to you. Don't go into a property purchase blind.
Knowledge is power, as they say.
It really is in this case.
That's
And if
fine.
you're feeling overwhelmed or unsure, don't be afraid to get advice from a financial advisor or property expert. They can help you make informed decisions that are right for your individual circumstances.
Solid advice. And since stamp duty reform is such a hot topic right now, it's worth staying up to date on the latest developments and proposed changes. Who knows, your state might be the next one to announce a major shakeup.
Definitely a dynamic space to watch. Maybe one day we'll look back on stamp duty as a relic of the past.
Fingers crossed. But for now, it's still a reality for most buyers in Australia. So do your research, seek expert advice, and stay informed. Okay, so before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to kind of put on our thinking caps for a sec and throw out a what-if question to our listeners.
Oh, a hypothetical.
Exactly. Imagine you're in charge. You have the power to completely redesign the property tax system here in Australia.
Okay, starting from scratch.
Yep, a clean slate. Knowing what we now know about stamp duty and its effects, what would your ideal system look like? Would you get rid of stamp duty altogether, go all in on land tax, or come up with something totally different?
That's a big question, and there's no easy answer. It's all about finding the right balance, right? We got to think about fairness efficiency, making sure the government still has enough money to fund essential services, and of course, how it impacts everyday Australians.
It's like a giant puzzle with a ton of moving pieces.
Exactly. And if we zoom out for a sec, the ultimate goal is to create a system that helps people move when they need to, supports Aussies in becoming homeowners, and keeps the economy running smoothly.
And hey, maybe it's a system that doesn't make people feel like they're getting robbed every time they buy a property.
Haha. I think we can all get behind that.
So listeners, we're throwing down the gauntlet. What would your ideal property tax system look like? Hit us up on social media and share your ideas. We're all ears.
This whole discussion really makes you think about the future of housing in Australia. How do we build a system that works for everyone? First-time buyers, retirees, investors, renters, everyone.
It's a conversation we need to have as a nation, and hopefully this deep dive has given you the knowledge and insights to be a part of it.
So, mate, to sum it all up, we've learned that stamp duty is a complex issue that goes way beyond just the dollar amount on your property.
Yeah, it's about the choices you make, the opportunities you have, and how this tax shapes our society as a whole.
And while finding the perfect solution is no walk in the park, the good news is there are alternatives out there, and the push for change is growing.
So stay informed, get involved in the conversation, and keep those brain cogs turning about the future of housing in Australia. You never know, your idea might be the one that changes everything for the better.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into stamp duty, mate. Catch you next time.